Hello YouTube, my name is Joe Lyman, and today I'm here to talk to you about race car vehicle dynamics, and in particular I'm going to talk today about weight transfer, or otherwise known as the dynamic weight distribution, and how that applies in racing in general, but more specifically in Forza Horizon 5. When it comes to weight distribution in general, it refers to how much weight is put on each of the wheels of your car. This varies depending on the car, how it's laid out. If your engine's up front, generally speaking, that's an extra block of mass over the weight added to the front wheels. And if it's in the back of the car, it's more weight out back. There are lots of different design factors that take a role, and depending on which vehicle you choose will basically determine where the center of gravity is. I'll cover over this again briefly in the car selection screen to kind of give you an idea of when you're selecting cars on what the weight distribution of any given vehicle is, to kind of give you an idea of how it will handle before you even get into the vehicle. Ideally, in terms of peak cornering ability, the best weight distribution would be an even split where every wheel is loaded equally. In this vehicle, or in this tutorial, I'll be covering this Lotus here. Sorry, not Lotus, Caterham Super 7, as well as looking at other vehicles, namely Porsche 911 and a higher center of gravity vehicle, maybe one of the Mercedes trucks or a van or something. Oops, my controller turned off. Let's keep that on. Next up, center of gravity in pictorial form is a circle, kind of like a BMW symbol with a black in two corners and white in two corners. Here, this hypothetical Caterham looking vehicle has the center of gravity right there. If you picked it up by that point, it would be perfectly balanced. Here's a top-down view again, depending on how the distance to the front tire contact patch and the rear tire contact patch. It's sort of, if it's a 50-50 split, that center of gravity will be split right in the middle. Otherwise, if it's more rearward weight bias, that line shifts backwards, and if it's more frontward bias, it shifts forward. In the bottom picture here, we have left-right balance as well as a height. Our center of gravity height can change, and while that doesn't really change anything in terms of the static or sitting still weight balance, it has a tremendous impact when we start talking about dynamic weight distribution. So what's the difference between static and dynamic? Well, static being, again, when your car is just sitting there, how much weight each tire gets. The dynamic weight balance is a complex analysis of how the weight transfers and moves and shifts, and how each wheel is loaded. Let's back up here a bit. Alright, cars. Let's go look at this one here. Toggle stats. I think I need to go to the buy menu to have a more detailed look. Or tuning would probably do it. But this should work good. Let's go to Caterham right here. Oh, filter, toggle stats. Hey, give me a sec. Garage, create some tunings, custom upgrade. Sure, there. Yeah, there. That's what I'm looking for. Under the bottom left-hand side, you can see power, torque, weight, front, and displacement. The front there, 47%, refers to the weight distribution front to rear. This is a small upgrade that only cuts 2 pounds of the whole vehicle, so it's not surprising to see no change in terms of weight distribution. But if we do more significant upgrades, like adding a chassis reinforcement and roll cage, we do see it balances out a little bit more, I suppose. But let's do one that actively adds weight. So a rear wing will apparently not weigh anything. Okay, I'll change the wheels. Now we're going on the back end here. We're going to put some. Look at that. It really doesn't like shifting weight balance. That's fine though. That's almost better because it helps you choose. There we go. That upgrade will do it. So with the all-wheel drive swap that we have here, we go from 47% of the weight on the front and 53% on the rear to 49% on the front and 51% on the rear. So technically, by buying that, we have just made this car more balanced. Now, when it comes to back to talking about dynamic weight distribution, can I see individual wheel weight damage? No. Okay. I forgot to shift back. Accessibility. Go back to full speed. We'll probably turn this back down again. Alright, there we go. Now, this is really clunky. You can see lots of bouncing around just because I'm off-road. Once here, now that I'm on pavement, it's a lot smoother, the weight transfers and weight distributions. When you go around a corner, because the center of gravity creates a lever arm effect, the distance from down here to here, this distance, when you go around a corner, there's the whole mass of the car effectively acts on that center of gravity. So this force times a distance creates a torque, which rolls your whole vehicle over, and that roll is countered by increased load and decreased load on your two tires, which again is a force at a distance, which creates a countering, balancing moment. If your wheels did not do that and you went around a corner, what would essentially happen is your car would just roll over. There'd be no balance, there'd be no equalizing force, and it just roll your vehicle. And the more of a cornering torque that your vehicle sees from the center of gravity, the more weight that is transferred from your tires. Eventually, if you had a tall enough vehicle, your inside wheels would lift off the ground and give it just a little bit more if your vehicle doesn't skid out first, and the vehicle itself would roll. Similar to rolling in corners, the car pitches with the nose going up and down when you hit the gas or brake. You can just barely see this in this very stiff suspension car. But if you had actually, if I go here, you can kind of see it a bit more. It's mostly camera angle that's changing now. But yeah, that up and down pitch of the nose corresponds with the loading and unloading of the front and rear wheels as weight is transferred to each other. Now, I wish dynamic weight distribution was as simple as that, but it goes a step further as well. When it comes to your suspension itself, each wheel has its own respective spring rate. So if you have soft springs, that will change the angle of the vehicle, and it will decrease the rate at which the weight is transferred from one side to the other, or front or rear. And if it's stiffer, it increases the speed that things transfer, which can make it more sensitive, as well as more prone to quickly losing traction if you're not careful with your application of various G-forces and unloading of different tires. This gets complicated again when you introduce anti-roll bars, which again add another layer to the weight transfer, because when you have a sway bar or anti-roll bar, they tie the left and the right wheels, front or rear, together. And when one wheel goes up, it applies a force on the other side as well. What that effectively works out as is it keeps your suspension softer in terms of going over bumps, but it resists the roll and weight, increases the rate of weight transfer from the left side to the right side. Some Formula cars notably have another form of anti-roll, where it's anti-pitch, where the front and the rear are tied together in a very similar way, where by tying the front, rear, left and right all together, you can effectively use softer suspension, but your car acts as though the center of gravity is lower because it has, or yeah, the weight will transfer quicker. Now, let's touch a bit more on the height of the center of gravity. This is a relatively low center of gravity car, so you can go quite quick around a corner with quite a high G-force without losing traction. If you had downforce on the vehicle, what ends up happening is, let's say your vehicle weighs 2,000 pounds and you have 1,000 pounds of downforce. If you're in a situation normally where your 2,000 pounds is entirely transferred from the inside to the outside and you're just about to pitch up and over, the 1,000 pounds of downforce from your aerodynamics spreads evenly, and it's an extra 500 on each side. So then you effectively still have 500 pounds on the inside and 2,500 pounds on the outside. So that creates a ratio effect and helps keep your car planted, which is why downforce is generally good in cars that are turning very, very hard. And again, why it's generally avoided in drag cars, aside from trying to keep your nose planted and or applying more force if you are traction limited. We're going to go now in my menu here to a high center of gravity vehicle. I could go for a Land Rover, but I was really more curious in going for this Unimog. This will be a good example vehicle for a vehicle with very high center of gravity. So now as we drive, it is notably slower just because of weight. But when I change side to side, despite this vehicle being way heavier and having a lot more load on each of its wheels, and despite the fact that I'm barely moving at all down the road, I can easily almost lift the tires off the ground, which is crazy, but that's due to the high center of gravity. So if you remember last time when I was mentioning with tires being non-linear, where the more load that they have, the less efficient that they become, the lower their effective coefficient of friction is. With your weight transfer, if you can minimize the weight transfer by lowering the center of gravity, you effectively gain traction, because all of your tires are operating at a higher coefficient of friction as they are loaded less. So then I guess the question becomes, if you have a vehicle, let's go back to the Caterham BC, and you say, okay, so if I don't want weight transfer, then don't I just want to plant the car as low as I can in my tuning settings? And essentially, yes, that's 100% what you want to do. But the key difference being, the key nuance to take into effect here is as low as you can, meaning eventually your car is going to hit the ground. If you're on perfectly smooth and flat surface, you can get that center of gravity a lot lower by changing your ride height. So I can go down from 4.7 to 3.3 in this setup, and that should keep me more planted, and it lowers the amount of weight transfer from side to side. Unfortunately, especially in Forza Horizon 5, perfectly smooth level surfaces are they're definitely not in every race. Many of the races in Forza Horizon 5 are off-road. And what happens then is, by having it really low to the ground when you go in a more off-road environment, let's see if I can see it here. You're losing traction because every time your car bottoms out on the ground, it's no longer, your tires are no longer engaged and you skid. You lose out thrust, you lose out braking, you lose out cornering, you lose out a lot of stuff for short, small impulse moments of time, and effectively you can't drive as fast as you otherwise would. Hence why in those situations you want to lift it off the ground a bit more and get it to exactly to a point where, depending on what sort of race you are, you're as low as you possibly can get without having your vehicle be unduly compromised by scraping on the ground. That's the key word there. You can scrape on the ground if it gains you extra time. You don't want to excessively scrape on the ground so that your net lap time decreases. And I don't know yet, but I wish there were a better mechanism than simply this one here, showing you when your wheels disengage. But if you see your wheels flashing red like that, every time they're red, they're not applying any force. They're either off the ground due to jumping, or they are off the ground due to bottoming out your vehicle. As a final quick brief mention, the other suspension tuning parameter that really affects your dynamic weight distribution is your damping. Damping right here, it is soft and stiff. What damping does is where a spring applies more and more pressure, the amount that it gets the amount of linear displacement it has, damping doesn't apply any force until your suspension moves. So if you're off-road and you have very stiff suspension, it takes a lot of force to move. First in bump is going up, or rebound, a lot of force to bring it back down. And the back down force is entirely spring force, whereas the bump up force is the combination of your car resisting the mass of it, and then the ground hitting your wheels up, and the interaction of those. So again, if you have lower, softer damping, then you have slower overall response. When you go into a corner suddenly, it'll take longer for the weight to transfer from side to side. And inversely, if you have stiffer damping, that weight transfer will happen quickly. And as a final, last bit of added detail, just if you're not confused enough, front and rear matters immensely in terms of balance. What I mean is, let's say your combined suspension setup transfers weight across the front tires faster than it does across the back tires. What effectively happens when you go into a corner and you're changing the transients, you're not in a steady state, your car's front tires will load up first, and if the back ones haven't loaded up yet, you'll end up understeering, where your front tires will break free first before the back ones. And inversely, it's the same as well, where if your back end is stiffer than your front end, when you turn into a corner, it'll take a while to load up the front end, but the back end will load up quicker, and your back end will end up breaking free first, giving you a condition of oversteer. And again, you can adjust all of those with either your damping, your springs, or your anti-roll bars. Even your wheel tire pressure can help allow you to balance the front to rear weight transfer. And I was just about to end right now, but there is one more that I thought about today that exists, that very, very few people, I think, anywhere ever talk about. I didn't learn about it in university or in any of the clubs or anything I've been in. But when it comes to, let's go here to a tuning shop. When it comes to the chassis upgrade, basically stiffening the chassis, there is an effect at play here as well. A stiffer chassis basically ties the front and the rear of the car together more, whereas a looser chassis allows a greater play and flexibility between the front and the rear. So if you go into upgrades and tuning, custom upgrade, and you have this chassis reinforcement roll cage and you apply or don't apply it, most people are like, it just adds weight. What's it actually doing? Well, this is it. What it does when you add this is it makes your front and rear biases, or how stiff and soft they are relative to each other, it reduces it. So it makes it easier to either fine tune in a smaller range, or if you get rid of it, it allows for greater maximum amount of variance between your front weight transfer and your rear weight transfer. Whew, that was a lot of information. I can understand if you probably didn't get all of it in this exceedingly long description. So don't be ashamed if you want to go back and review it. I will be linking after this video a link to a playlist of other topics of race car vehicle dynamics and how they apply in Forza Horizon 5. I stream regularly. I'd love to see more people out talking, asking questions, just hanging. I also play other games. Right now I'm big into Forza and Satisfactory. I'd love to see you. Please subscribe. If you found this information useful, I would appreciate it even more if you didn't subscribe or didn't just subscribe, but you took the time to share it to somebody who will appreciate this information. Anyway, I'm Joe Lyman. You have yourself a good night. Peace.